Mad Max Fury Road, which was released in 2015, directed by George Miller, written by George Miller, Brendan McCarthy, and Nick Lathoris. This film had a budget of $150 million and a global box office of $375 million. In a post-apocalyptic wasteland, a woman rebels against a tyrannical ruler in search for her homeland with an aid of a group of female prisoners, a psychotic worshiper, and a drifter named Max. This film stars Charlize Theron, Tom Hardy, Nicholas Hoult, Hugh Keys-Byrne, Zoe Kravitz, Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, and Nathan Jones. This film was nominated for 10 Oscars and won 6, including Best Editing, Best Sound Mixing, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hair, Best Sound Editing, and Best Production Design. And this is one of the most visually stunning films and unique films in recent years, and one of my favorite ways to describe it is it's just pure insanity on an epic scale. The concept, the visuals, the action, it's just crazy awesome.
Yeah, I think everyone was taken by surprise when George Miller came out with this film because it had been a while since he had made a Mad Max, and before this he made Happy Feet. Not only is this hands down one of the best action films ever made, but like you said, it was nominated for 10 Oscars, and I think it showed the potential that an action film can be great and revered as a piece of cinema. The idea of a straight-up action film being nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, it's a rare action jewel in this genre. There are not many action movies, straight-up action movies that are nominated for Best Picture. I mean, I think the most famous one besides this is Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm pretty sure that was nominated for Best Picture. But again, that's Spielberg, so it's an expert director. Not saying that George Miller is not a brilliant director, but like you just said, he coming off the Mad Max franchise in the 80s, he really did the Last Witches, or the Witches of Eastwick. Mm-hmm. He did Babe Pig in the Big City, and he did the 2 Happy Feet movies. So he kind of slowed down as a director. He didn't do a ton of projects, and I feel like he's just been developing this project for the last 25 years.
Yeah, and the reason for that is the Mad Max films with Mel Gibson, they were successful, but they weren't like crazy hits. So he never was given a ton of money by studios to make gigantic films. And I think he really enjoys making animated films, which is why he did Happy Feet. And he actually wanted to originally envisioned this movie to be an animated, 3D animated Mad Max movie when he was in development on this in the early 2000s. And it took him 20 years to get this movie made from the concept of the idea to the actual production of the film. So and he was almost in production on it with Mel Gibson originally set to star, but the financial crisis hit and put a halt on any kind of production. So he had to go back to a Happy Feet sequel instead of making this film.
Yeah, he wanted Mel Gibson to reprise the role, I think, in the early 2000s. Then he was thinking about Heath Ledger as the lead when he was trying to get it developed again. And I think they said he came up with the original concept for the movie in 1998, which he had to rewrite because of 9/11, he says. So they wrote an entirely new script. So I'm sure that something about the world was just different, and he had to change the socio-political themes of it, I'm sure. And he made the original Mad Max in 1979, which starred Mel Gibson, and it launched a franchise of 3 films that Mel Gibson starred in as the title character. And now, obviously, it's being rebooted because we have Mad Max Fury Road. We have the Furiosa spinoff that's going to be made, starring Anya Taylor-Joy. And then Tom Hardy's actually signed on to 3 more Mad Max films, so he's going to be in another Mad Max spinoff in that direction, following that character still. And you can tell that Miller clearly had the vision of something enormous and vast in the 70s and 80s, but he couldn't really do it with the budget he was working with. Like you said, he didn't have much to work with. The first film was $300,000 budget.
That's inflated. It was $100,000 in the time they made it.
And the second film had a budget of $3 million, and the third film had a budget of $10 million. So if you think about it, the first 3 installments of this franchise that Miller made, he had less than a tenth of the budget that he worked with on the Mad Max Fury Road movie.
Yeah, Fury Road had a budget total of about $150 million, and then another $60 million or so for marketing costs. So it had a huge amount of money behind it, which is what gave Miller the freedom to really show the true vision he had for these movies. And you can see the potential from the first couple of films, but with this, he had all the resources he needed at his disposal, and they spent 7 months shooting this in the desert. And I think that this film is unique because it is the purest sense of an action movie that has ever been made, where if you think about it, this movie is just an action sequence. It's just a chase from start to finish. Right when Max is taken captive by the war boys until the end of the film, it's pretty much a nonstop chase. And he expanded the chase sequence into 2 hours.
And Miller, he has this insane vision that he couldn't have made 30 years ago. And he's kind of like the Romero of the zombie genre. He's the Romero of the post-apocalyptic genre, where he basically wrote the rules for this genre and helped create it what it was. And obviously you still see similarities between modern post-apocalyptic films that are trying to grasp what Mad Max has created in those early films, like especially like The Rover and The Book of Eli. They look just like Mad Max, this barren wasteland of people, scavengers fighting and just trying to survive.
But he also makes it look very unique from any other dystopian post-apocalyptic film before it, because the style he used in this film, he shot it with extremely saturation, very high levels of saturation and color, and he did that on purpose because he wanted Mad Max Fury Road to look different from any other apocalyptic dystopian movie. And all of those other movies in the genre, they're desaturated, they're very bleak in color, and they're very muted. But with Mad Max Fury Road, it's super saturated. There are extremely high levels of oranges, blues, reds, and it's just the colors just pop on the screen, unlike anything you've seen before in this genre. And I think that really sets it apart, because every scene you can really see the deep blue of the sky contrasted with the orange sand of the desert, and it's beautiful.
And then the nighttime shots, which we'll get into later on, are even incredibly vibrant blues too. And I think it's just the perfect metaphor of this entire film. Aesthetically, what we're about to see is Mad Max's opening line, where he's like, "My name is Max, and my world is fire." So like, that's what he says, right?
Yeah.
So it just opens up that we're gonna see something very colorful, and obviously less of that desaturated look that we usually see in more bleak post-apocalyptic films.
Yeah, and it's actually a great way to keep the audience engaged, because orange and blue, the two main colors of this movie, they're on opposite sides of the color wheel, so they're very engaging to the eye of humans, and they keep us our attention on the screen. And it's in the marketing, it's in all the shots, this contrast of these colors, and I think it just looks fantastic. And it's the cinematography in this movie is unbelievable, and it's kind of absurd when you watch this movie to think that they actually filmed all of these action set pieces, because this is probably the most impressive film to showcase stunt work ever made. The vast majority of the stunt work, of the action, of the crashes, of the cars, of the fight scenes is real in-camera work that they did. It's not CGI. They use CGI to manipulate the images in ways of changing the color palette, of changing the landscape of the desert. So the deserts they shot in, they weren't exactly like that. They had to literally paint with CGI new backgrounds to make it look a little more expansive and to fit the needs of the vision. And also, they changed mountain ranges. They changed rock formations to help with the script, like that scene where they get trapped within that valley, that tight valley. That most of that CGI, and they just added that in. And also the Citadel is obviously all CGI, but otherwise, there's everything that you see is shot in camera, which is why it looks so impressive, because when a car crashes or explodes, it's a real explosion.
This episode is also brought to you by Manscaped, the leaders in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your comfort, obsesses over their technology developments to provide you the best tools for your grooming experience. Again, it's the holiday season. You got to get your gift shopping done. Do it early so you don't have to stress about it in mid-December. Manscaped.com is the perfect place to get gifts for all the men in your life. You got a boyfriend, a husband, brother, siblings, cousins, uncles, aunts, your father. I'm telling you, any guy would love any product from Manscaped. We got their performance packages. They send us their briefs, t-shirts. Their cologne smells fantastic. Like, I don't wear cologne, but I kind of dig this cologne a lot. Their lawnmower is the best buzzer I've ever used in my life. It's got a light on it. It's waterproof. The Weed Whacker is a great way to, subtly tell the men in your life that they need to trim up specific spots like their nose hairs and ear hairs. So it's, you got to groom. We got to groom. It's part of life. We're human beings. We got hair growing everywhere. So manscaped.com. Use Raiders of the Lost at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. Again, Raiders of the Lost at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. This was a 7-month shoot in the desert of Namibia. The stunt crew was trained by Cirque du Soleil, so they truly deserve a ton of recognition for this film, as much as they can get, because in no other movie will you see stunt actors doing what they're doing in this film, where they're just driving high speed, these crazy rigs, these cars, and they're just exploding cars everywhere. There's fire everywhere. There's just that high octane diesel everywhere. They're jumping from car to car, and it's just incredibly impressive. And these stunt men and these stunt women are just insane maniacs who deserve all the credit in the world.
He really upped the ante with what you can do in action, and like we've said previously, people can tell when CGI is on screen and when something isn't real. And I think the reason why this movie is so effective is because we can tell that all of these cars, all these motorcycles, all these rigs, they're real, they're tangible, and they're not made from computer graphics animation, and they actually have the actors on them and the stunt people on them, and I think it's so impressive, and that's why the movie works, because we know it's real.
And again, I keep talking about this vision that George Miller had that only really he could probably see and his graphic artists could see and his storyboarders could see, because I think he storyboarded it with a graphic novelist designer.
A team of them.
So the illustrations are phenomenal for what they came up with before they filmed. But again,
they made about 3,000 storyboards.
Yeah, but Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron, they were known for on set. They had doubts about the production and were curious. They maybe didn't fully understand what exactly they were making, what kind of film they were making, because again, they're in the desert for 7 months filming. Who knows what they were doing for 7 months? Is explosions and cars and chases. They were probably thinking, like, what is the story of this entire film? And I read that Hardy was even quoted as saying that he had to apologize to Miller for when he first saw the movie and he finally understood the vision that Miller had for the entire film.
You can understand and empathize with what they were going through, because obviously, like we said, they painted a lot of the backgrounds to change the backgrounds from what they were really shooting in. So the deserts they were shooting in, they weren't as impressive and as expansive as we saw in the film. They were very simple deserts, and they were just outside of a village and outside of that city. And in terms of being an actor on that set, where you're spending like months just sitting in the front seat of a truck, and Miller is handling the entire production of all these stunt teams and coordinations, and he knows what the movie's going to look like when it's all done. But when you're the actor on set, you can't understand the vision that the director has in terms of not just what he's shooting, but what he's going to add to the scenes and what he's going to add visually after the fact of shooting.
Yeah, so I completely understand that like myopic sense of feeling for the film and not being able to see the full vision of it. So I totally get what they were going through. Again, 7 months shoot in the desert. And then Margaret Sixel was the editor of this film, and she's George Miller's wife. And she won the Oscar for Best Editing in this film, and he chose her to do this despite never editing an action film before, because he wanted it to look not like every other action movie that's come out, because you could easily see how someone could have turned this movie into just looking like this great action film, but not transcendent like the way it was. And I think the editing by Margaret Sixel is one of the most important aspects of this film. It's sensational editing, some of the best you'll ever see, and she had 470 hours of footage to go through before she started editing, which took 3 months to view and catalog.
That's a lot of footage. And it really pays off, because the editing is different from other action films, because it's not a lot of cuts. She holds on to shots for a while before she cuts them. It's not back and forth. Each shot, there's a couple of seconds or a few seconds even in the most intense action scenes. So she takes her time with the editing. And that vision also translates into the story as well, because there are a lot of feminist themes in Mad Max Fury Road. I think the main character is not actually Max. The main character is Furiosa, and her story along with trying to save the wives of Immortan Joe. And I think that it has a lot of feminist themes in terms of a woman's identity and being in control of her own body and being in control of her own life, and not allowing men to decide their fates in life. And I think that those are the strongest themes that resonate for me in the film.
Yeah, I think I read that he had the writer of the Vagina Monologues was a consultant on the script for this film to really give that strong female voice and the feminist voice to this film and the characters, which clearly comes across.
And it also displays the social themes of power, and how Immortan Joe, because he controls the water, he has control of the most important resource, and so he controls the people, and they've become desperate, and they live each day trying to get as much water as they can from Joe when he releases the water for a short amount of time. And the power he has over these people, he abuses it, and it can be definitely seen in the world today of people who have power and abuse their powers over the citizens of their lands.
Which is something we'll commonly see in these dystopian post-apocalyptic films. And Immortan Joe is just this terrifying character, but despite being like this god that he's created himself into for these people of the desert and the war boys that he commands, he's physically very weak, and he can barely even stand up without or survive without his life support and his breathing mask and whatever he's got going on, like his Darth Vader-esque costume, and which I think he makes look terrifying on purpose, because that hides the true weakness of him internally from everybody else. That's why he's got a very scary mask, and his body armor has like, it's just like ripped and chiseled, and he looks way more intimidating than he probably actually is behind the mask.
Yeah, and Miller shows a shot of his body from behind, and it looks like he's dying, and his body is weak, and he's got like warts and cysts all over him. And you're right, he covers himself with this armor that makes him look more fierce and intimidating, because the only way he's able to maintain his power is through fear, and fear is the most motivating emotion you can put within people to make them bend at your will.
This episode of Raiders of the Lost podcast is brought to you by our good friends at movieposters.com. Use coupon code Raiders15 to get 15% off your order today. It's the holiday season. It's time to get all your gifts, all your presents. I'm sure you have some movie-loving friends and family members out there. Getting them a gift from movieposters.com is the best thing you can get them, using the coupon code Raiders15 to get 15% off your order right now at checkout. They offer great designs like plaque designs, original designs, framing, backlight, canvas. Definitely check them out, movieposters.com, Raiders15 for 15% off your order. And Hugh Keys-Byrne plays Immortan Joe. He's the actor who also played the lead villain in the first Mad Max movie. And again, Furiosa, she's the lead character in this film. It's her story. She has the master plan. She's the one who makes the courageous decision to free the villain's concubine and his prized breeders, these women he has oppressed their entire lives and controlled their entire lives. And she's the one that takes the lead of this story. And it's great because obviously Mad Max is the name of the franchise. You could call it like it's like Star Wars. It's the title of the franchise in the world. And then it's just, I love Miller taking that and flipping on its head, where he just uses it as the moniker of the brand. Obviously Max in this movie too, but having the strong female lead of this action movie with one arm, total badass, shaved head, just flips the action genre on its head, especially what you probably expected to happen with when you hear when we heard Tom Hardy got cast as Max, and like obviously Charlize Theron we knew would be in it too, but you assumed that Max would be the lead character of this movie, and it would be his storyline, but it's all Furiosa.
And I don't think Max could be the lead of this film. It wouldn't work because he's reached a point in his life where he's been living in this dystopian hellhole for so long, and he's become this lone ranger in a way. He's given up on trying to help people. He's given up on trying to insert himself into the lives of others, and he's just literally reached this point where he's just trying to survive day by day and nothing else. And from the size of his beard and his hair when we first see him, he's probably been alone for years now, and so I don't think he's mentally or emotionally able to have any kind of his own story or goal to achieve, because he doesn't have a goal anymore. It's just survival, and that's why Furiosa has to be the lead of this film, because she has a goal and she has a journey that she's trying to overcome, and that's why it has to this movie and story has to center on her character.
Yeah, Max is shaped by the world he lives in. You can tell he at one point in his life was probably a decent and moral man. But he's forced to live with just one purpose in his life, and that is to survive, which he brings up multiple times.
Yeah, he was decent before the first film when he was just a cop, but then his family was killed, and that was the first nail in the coffin for his humanity. And now he's just reached this point where he's barely human.
Yeah, and I think the biggest criticism I've heard of this film is Max's minimal dialogue. And as we've said it many times in the show, you don't need dialogue to tell a story. You don't. And Max says 52 lines total of dialogue, and some of those lines are like one word, 2 words.
Tom Hardy does a whole lot of grunting in this movie too.
But I mean, I don't mind it at all. That's just part of the performance. That's part of who Max is now. He's been living by himself. He hasn't had anyone to talk to, and he's really he has that mentality where he doesn't want to trust anybody. So that's why he has minimal dialogue in this entire film, and he's plagued with these constant memories and visions of his past, of all these people who he couldn't help or he couldn't save, and he's been haunted by that for where he is now. And the little girl in particular that's constantly coming up in his visions, they explain in one of the prequel comic books that came out after the film that he was a little girl that he couldn't save.
Also, his behavior is a little weird at first, like his facial tics, and he often grunts instead of speaking because, like you said, he's been on his own for so long. It's like being stuck on a desert island for years and then returning to people, and you don't really know how to socialize. So he's socially awkward, and he's forgotten how to interact with people. I mean, he's just been driving around in his car for years in the desert, so clearly he wouldn't be someone who's going to go off on these lengthy monologues or have a great personality. So it makes sense for the character where he is in his life to not have that much to say, as opposed to the Mel Gibson films where he actually does have a lot to say.
Whereas Furiosa, her soul and her hope are what drives this entire film and drives the storyline. She's like the only source of humanity we see. But her in the breeders that she helps escape, and her final desperate attempt in life is to save these innocent women and return to her home of the green world. And this is something that she's clearly been planning for a long time, and she's going to follow through with it no matter how suicidal or how improbable it will be to pull off. And she's just desperate to see a new step for humanity, maybe a new generation of people living in more equality and trying to build something more rather than living in that godlike control of Immortan Joe at the Citadel.
Yeah, and Furiosa, in her hope, in her drive, is the main force that changes Max as a character, because when this film starts, Max believes that he needs to just be on his own and be alone and just survive, and he doesn't want to help anyone. He doesn't want anyone's help. And then the first chance he gets, he abandons Furiosa and the woman because he believes he needs to just be alone to survive. But obviously, she set that the settings on the truck to make it the kill switch is on the truck, so he can't go. And then again later in the film, Max has the opportunity to just leave on a motorcycle and abandon these people, and so it's because of Furiosa that Max decides to not only help these people but come up with a plan, and ends up putting his life in danger to help these people. So she changed his character, and he transformed because of her.
Yeah, he transforms from just a survivor to a redeemer and something more. He chooses to put his life on the line to save the woman and help them get back to the Citadel. He uses his blood when he was already short on blood from the beginning of the story, being a blood bank to one of the war boys, gives his blood to Furiosa, despite how I don't think it's scientifically accurate just because you're a universal donor that your blood can give to anyone. I think there's a little more biology involved, but still it's fun to let that go. But I think one of the most fascinating parts of this film to me are the war boys of Immortan Joe. And these characters, they're just visually just incredibly disturbing and intriguing at the same time, where they just covered in this pale white, they're bald, they have blackened eyes, they look incredibly weak and sick because they're clearly from this world of radiation, and their half-lives, which they get called multiple times, mean they're probably going to die in their early 30s, maybe a little sooner, and they're clearly going through some sort of leukemia or cancer, some cancer of the blood. I think that's what leukemia is, and you can tell they have cancer obviously from the tumors around their necks and all over their bodies, and just how visibly sick they are, and they need these blood banks to survive to the fullest extent of their final parts of their lives, which is where Max and Nux kind of become a pair in the beginning of the film, as Nux uses Max as this blood bank to survive during this battle where they're going to track down Furiosa.
Yeah, Nicholas Hoult is great in this movie, and the war boys they're intensely devoted to Immortan Joe as more of a spiritual, religious god or deity to them, and he's convinced these people that if they die defending him in his world, then they'll be welcomed into Valhalla. That's the greatest honor a war boy can achieve. And it's this really great image where before they sacrifice themselves, they spray paint that silver chrome all over their mouth and teeth. I think that when they do that, it could be a drug that gets them high, and it's kind of like euphoric for them. And so that allows them to feel more willing to sacrifice themselves as well. So when they're spray painting their faces, I think they're getting high doing that.
Oh, absolutely, because it's chrome paint, so you're going to get pretty buzzed off that. And also, it's like they worship V8, the deity, the D8 of high octane and gasoline and guzzling. And like you said, they have that belief that they'll enter Valhalla. And I think in Warboy, Nux says that line, I live, I die, I live again. So they have this belief that if they follow Immortan Joe's philosophy, they'll live forever, basically. Yeah, which is obviously common in a lot of different organizations that we've seen do horrible things in the world.
So this world is filled with incredible characters, and it's such a unique vision. It's endlessly entertaining. There are a couple major set pieces of action in this film that are just so stunning, incredible. And whenever I watch this movie, I literally feel my heart rate pounding because it's so intense, and it's exciting to see these vehicles and this stunt work, and it harkens back to the old style of filmmaking where it's not just all CGI and special effects and and animation. It's real actors and stunt people and really driving these cars, and and also Miller gets so ridiculous with it at times, and like tongue in cheek, like having that crazy guitar player with a flamethrower on the end of the guitar,
which was real.
Yeah, it was a real flamethrower, and the drummers with the giant speakers. So it's a little ridiculous in a good way.
But I think what really, again, ties it all together is the editing, because in going back to Margaret Sixel and her editing, she'll focus on, there's so many different action sequences going on at the same time in all these chase scenes. You know, each part of the truck has a little fight going on. There's people constantly trying to jump on the trucks, and she does a great job not staying too long on each one of these sequences, where normally we'll see like an action scene and two people will fight for like what feels like 3 minutes. She's bouncing around with these great cutting techniques where we're seeing here real quick. We're not seeing too much of what's happening in the front deck. We're seeing this other person coming from the side attacking the truck. So she's great job at like flowing through the entire scene to give us a quick glimpse of everything that's going on.
You're absolutely right. You're able to process everything, even though there's so many moving parts and there's so many people involved in every action sequence. You're never confused. So you're absolutely right. I think that's why she won the Oscar, because she keeps you in the film, and she keeps you informed and able to process the situations and the action that's happening in front of you.
And you talked about the beautiful aesthetic of these deserts, and they're so vibrant and so red and colorful, and then it's perfectly contrasted with these night sequences, which are so blue and also vibrant, which normally when you'll see a night sequences, it's very dark, but the way they did this, it's not super common anymore. But Miller filmed these night sequences in pure daylight. It's called day for night filmmaking. And all these shots, again, broad daylight, so you can see everything. And obviously, people don't do this very often, because it would be great to film more at night, but cameras and film stock is not as sensitive as the human eye, so you can't really pick up what you can really see as a person, despite it's getting better and better every year. A lot of cameras nowadays are pretty much practically seeing in the dark as it is. But what they did to film these is they overexposed the shots, and then they desaturated a little bit and just added so much blues and colors to these nighttime sequences. And the benefit of overexposing these shots is the darks and the shadows aren't clipping to black, and you can actually see a lot of detail in there.
It's almost like you can see the same way that nocturnal animals can see at nighttime. And I think the reason why filmmakers don't really use this technique is because what happened in this film and what Miller does is, like you said, he desaturates the image and then he adds a lot of blue. And what that does is it takes away all the other colors from the image, so all you see is blue. The entire image on every person, every article of clothing, it's all blue, 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 blue. Whereas if you filmed it at nighttime, it would be, a cooler image, but then you'd still see the other colors in the scene. And so I think that it works in this film because in the daylight, you get so much orange and brown from the desert. And a lot of the clothing of the characters it matches the tones and colors of the desert itself. And so you're able to contrast that by making the nighttime scenes all blue. And so that's why I think it works, because it's really it's a great contrast of the orange and blue and day and night.
Yeah, I don't think this will really work in other films. It's just because this film aesthetically looks like a graphic novel. It's so vibrant, so colorful, so it's obviously will work to contrast the daytime with very colorful and bright night times. And Furiosa is faced with the horrible dilemma and realization that when she finds the other woman from her green world where she grew up, in that this place, the green place, just like everything else in the world, has died, and they have no other option. And obviously Mad Max comes up with the idea to go straight back to the Citadel, come back with the way they came. It's unprotected, and to take it over and to beat Immortan Joe there.
And then there's that great action sequence where they do encounter Immortan Joe and his crews. They do get away and they make it to the Citadel. And what they find is that the people at the Citadel, they're happy that Immortan Joe has been killed, and they celebrate his death. And even the other members of Joe's circle decide to let Furiosa up and welcome her instead of Immortan Joe, because they know it would endanger themselves, because the public is so elated at his death.
And the war boy Nux, he goes through an incredible character transformation where he becomes an ally to the woman and to Max and to Furiosa, and he ends up sacrificing himself to save the other woman.
Yeah, because his philosophies and everything he's been taught, he's learning is false and not true, and he's just being used by Immortan Joe.
And there's obviously some major themes going on in this film. related to our current world in terms of water conservation and renewable energy and using resources efficiently, and war for oil, and maybe there's going to be a war for water someday, and how to try to avoid those problems that we're going to eventually run to at some point, because this world only has so many resources, and it keeps growing in terms of population. So we're gonna have to try to take better care of what's going on in our day-to-day lives. And it's also similar to, it reminds me of Ready Player One, whereas in terms of, it's not oil and water, it's bandwidth, and like the whole war for the internet, and kind of like they have to live their world in that virtual reality. So it kind of reminds me, and that's also a dystopian post-apocalyptic world too. So it reminds me of Ready Player One in some ways.
Yeah. And the water is a resource that in 50 years, it could be an extremely limited supply unless something is done. And I know a lot of people talk about just climate change and oil and natural fossil fuels, but water is a resource that could be in great danger in the coming decades. And this film is based upon the idea of water running out across the world, and the reason why Immortan Joe has powers because he has the water, and that could end up happening one day.
And it's so ironic because the majority of the planet is underwater. Just got to figure out how to get all that salt out efficiently.
You can do that, but it's the machinery required is far too expensive to be able to make enough of it that would supply fresh water to people on Earth. So it's an unfeasible way to solve that problem. It's all about trying to preserve the fresh water on Earth.
Mad Max Fury Road is a sensational film. Absolutely blew my expectations out of the water. It's really fun time. George Miller doesn't take his foot off the pedal from the moment the film begins, and it's a great action film, one of the best in the genre ever.
Yeah, this is one of the greatest action movies ever made, and it's going to stand the test of time for sure. And it's going to set the stage for what you can do with action in the future.